Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Discussing a Murderer. This is Jeff Jones. With me today is the partial panel. We'll just start with the lead off and welcome Kelly. How you doing, Kel? Good morning.
Good morning, everybody. It's always a pleasure to be back. It's been a very eventful few weeks for me. I had my daughter turn 18, my son's turning 13, so I've taken some time out to be with the family, and I'm back. So let's get going.
Well, I think we all need a break and, let Kel's advice echo on throughout the community. Everybody needs to take a step back from the case or whatever they're doing. This is just one part of our lives, not the only part of our lives. Right, Dr. Silkman?
Yes, family always comes first, and sometimes it is important just to step away and refresh and re-energize and get to know who your family members are all over again. But thank you very much, Jeff. It's great to be here, and I like to say hi to all my fellow panel members and everyone in chat. It's great to be here, and let's get on with the show.
On with the show, and as he says, on to the next, Big Jeff.
Well, I'd like to wish a very happy birthday to my sunshine, Kel's daughter, Latoya. She's always been a big supporter of Big Jeff, and I love to see that. And I'm always a fan of hers. If that rotten boyfriend of hers, treats her badly, I'm going to punch him right in the nose when I finally do make it to Australia. So that being said, I am ready. We have to pick it up today, guys, for our friend Jack, who's not around. We have to have his back. So we're just going to have to work extra hard today, and give the guilters the business. So let's go.
Yeah, I don't know if I can fill in for Jack, but we'll all have to try. Is that right? So, as Big Jeff says, and as our motto goes, on to the next.
They would wait for down. That's that girl
There's-
trader. Hey.
As we showed, there's evidence that she actually did do hustle shots just like that.
My goal is to undermine confidence in the verdict. I don't have to show what actually happened, but I want to know what happened to her. Because I think it's a disgrace. I think it's a disgrace to someone who did it. We started constructing about a 6-week pattern of Teresa Halbach's activities from the cell phone towers. And we started noticing that there was a consistency with her travel and the accuracy of the cell phone towers. So even though there's some debate among cell phone tower experts that it can't be that accurate, her calls are dead on with where her appointments are. I mean, we're seeing an accuracy as she's traveling around. We can see it in the cell phone towers. Why is that important? It's important because it sets up a time frame of when we think she was at Avery's and when she left Avery's. So at 2:24, we know on the cell phone tower that she's around the Zipperers, but then she heads north. 2:27 to 2:31, she's on the phone with Don Plitzka at Auto Trader magazine, and Teresa reported she was on her way to the Averys. And then she's pulling up to the Avery property at 2:31.
Then she gave me the book, shut the door. I walked to her house. I put the book by the computer. I came back out. And I was gonna walk over to Bobby. But then his vehicle was gone.
So you walk in the house, you put the magazine on, you come out, and Bobby's vehicle's gone?
Bobby's vehicle was gone.
Okay.
Because then I looked up by the road and I seen her. And she was almost by the end of the road. She had a single lane turn.
Teresa, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay. Which signal light she had on, right or left?
Then left.
The left.
Because she had one towards the high system.
Our theory is Teresa leaves the Avery property and makes a left turn. I believe that Teresa was heading home that afternoon because we found a day planner that she'd filled in for the 31st. And one thing that it indicated was that she wanted to go to her mother's house before 3 p.m. And so she was on a schedule to be back in Hilbert on or before 3 p.m. Her route home, what she would have done is take a left on Q and headed south on Q. The last call, the call that she forwards when her phone is still active, is made at 2:41. That call pings off a cell phone tower miles away from the Avery property, the Whitelaw Tower.
There are overhead photographs and pictures that actually show that the field between Stephen Avery's trailer and also Highway 147 was indeed flat. Around his property, on one of the sides, there was a cornfield. The cornfield had been picked and it had been cut down. So Stephen being able to see a vehicle turn left on Highway 147 was indeed possible. So he didn't make that up. Whether he had the ability to distinguish what type of vehicle that he actually saw from that distance, that could be a little bit tricky. But according to Stephen, he did see a vehicle. He said it was Teresa Horbach's RAV4 do a left-hand turn on Highway 147.
One piece of evidence that I'll offer to the people, I know we're a bunch of true crime junkies around here. If you look, for example, at the case of Adnan Syed, I believe this is where it happened. They used cell phone information in his case, and the cell phone information in his case had a specific note at the bottom of it, and that note was, and the phone companies will make these notes that these pings are not accurate. The only way you can guarantee accuracy of these pings is if the call was made by the mobile phone, what I would call a mobile originated call as opposed to a mobile terminated call. So that may be why some people question the accuracy of that tower ping. But the fact of the matter is, in 2G GSM with the technology that they were using, there's no doubt that is the tower that the call was routed through. So really, the only question in my mind was, if you're a guilter, you have to believe that Teresa's phone, irrespective of how far away it was, and Kathleen is actually about to give us an outrageously wrong number about how far away that Whitelaw Tower is from the Avery salvage yard. But it's still pretty far from the Avery salvage yard. It's actually about, as I recall, about, she's going to say it's like 13 miles, and I think it's closer to 7 miles, or I can't remember if she says miles or kilometers. We're going to have to do a special course. The day that I'm on travel, right? We have to come to this. If I had my my Google Maps in front of me, we could do this sort of exactly how far the mileage was. But at the end of the day, she was closer to the tower than Kathleen is about to say. But there's a bunch of towers, including the tower that's near Zippers, that are actually closer to her. And the phone itself is not going to respond to a notification from the tower unless it is reasonably close to be able to do that, right? The way that the cellular telephony works is that as you navigate through the mobile environment, the cell phone is constantly looking for the tower that's best for it, and in second generation cellular, which is what she had, 2G GSM, every time the phone comes upon a new tower, it will notify the core network that I'm going to be in idle mode, which means I'm not making a call or texting or anything like that, but I'm going to be camping on this tower. Excuse me. It will send something to the core network called the location area update. That location area update is basically sort of kind of a registration with the tower, so the network knows where to go look for her. So it'd be highly unlikely that that ping came from a different tower. The only question is, is it possible to be as far away as the Avery salvage yard, where cell phone service is notoriously bad, and still be able to connect to that tower? And this is something that could have been easily addressed in 2005, excuse me, just by taking a singular wireless handset, just like Teresa had, walking around the Avery salvage yard, and see if you can actually connect to that white tower. It's something that's so easy to do. It's actually kind of sickening that nobody even thought to do it, given the importance of that last cell phone ping. So sorry for the convoluted explanation without pictures, but maybe we can do a special on it at some point, Jeff.
I think it's a great idea. Anytime you want to go into a little bit more depths of that, Jeff, that's a great idea. Anybody else have any comments before we move on?
Well, I just want to say that what an excellent answer from Big Jeff, and that goes to show the importance of having an expert. And it sort of like beggars belief that I don't think the state actually did enough to get to the bottom of all of this in terms of finding out exactly where Teresa Halbach was, because 2:41 is a critical time off point, because that's the last time her phone receives any form of activity. Now, what, of course, Mr. Kratz was trying to insinuate was that, well, the reason why Teresa Halbach's phone never got any more phone calls was because he burnt her phone, right? And it's very, very interesting that that's the way the state left it and never really did an in-depth study or pursuit to find out, okay, was Teresa Halbach off the property, yes or no? And I believe that they surely could have done a little bit more effort to find out the answer, whether Teresa had actually left the property or whether it could not be established. In other words, is there definitive proof that she hit upon the White Lord Tower, or was it another cell phone tower?
We haven't seen the text, right? Many of us have poured through the actual call logs that have been provided by First Singular Wireless and subsequently AT&T when Kathleen Zellner subpoenaed a whole year worth of calls. You can see what's not on that phone list is the text that she got from Bradley Check. Why? Because it wasn't a phone call. And that log wasn't meant to capture texts. So if we had her texts, we might actually have a better idea of when that phone actually did go offline. It's not necessarily clear to me that we might be able to get tower information from that, based upon the records kept at that time, but we certainly might have a better idea of who was trying to communicate, whether the exact time was the last time that phone was actually turned off or went off the network. And we just don't have it. Completely piss poor police work. The accuracy, there's a lot. There's a lot of famous diagrams that you'll see that people who provide cell phone based testimony, as you'll very likely see in the Idaho 4 case, right? Because the cellular forensic records are one of the things that they're relying on. And what the experts on the Koberger side are going to say is that the cell phone data is really not sufficiently accurate to place him inside or even on the same street, the Kings Road street, and that's 100% correct, right? It's so, and especially in an urban environment, like if you're trying to locate somebody down to the cell phone towers have 3 sectors on them. They're typically 120 degrees. There's a 300, have 360 degree coverage one sector covers 120 degrees. They usually have 3 sectors. And sort of the best you can hope for is that by understanding what sector that you pinged on, and you kind of have an idea of roughly, what geographic footprint that you might be in, roughly speaking. In an urban environment where there's a lot of what we call multipath and a lot of RF shadowing as the signal propagates through an environment with tall buildings and things like that, it's not uncommon at all for you to attach to what you might call a surprise sector. Right? That's not a technical word you'll hear in a trial, but it's notoriously unreliable, especially in an urban environment. In a suburban and rural environment, like we're talking about in Manitowoc, there's not a lot of reflective type services, which is why Kathleen Zellner is probably seeing sort of a reasonable proximity kind of thing that, and I don't think she's trying to pinpoint Teresa Halbach's location, down to 1 meter or even down to 10 meters. She's saying, it's reasonable to assume that she's in the vicinity of this sector. Which is kind of perfectly reasonable statement to make. Not out of the realm of possibility at all. I mean, it's when you try and say you're within 10 feet of this person, you're within 10 feet of something that you start to get ridiculous. But maybe you can refresh me with the question so I can actually give you an answer to it if I haven't already.
The question is, could someone back in 2005 have gone with some type of electronic device and to determine which cell phone tower would have hit if Teresa Halbach was on County Q?
Yes, and the answer is yes. And such a tool would have been called like a NEMO drive tool, right there. There's a I'm very familiar with many of those tools. Those drive tools are very accurate. And you can probably, especially since you're not in an environment with a lot of skyscrapers, you're not in an environment with a lot of obstructions between the tower and the cell phone, except for maybe a lot of trees, which are not really great reflectors, then you can reasonably expect that the results that you get from that drive testing would be consistent, especially as a function of the time of year. And this being October, the leaves are already off the trees, right?
Yes.
So you're not talking about a lot of potential obstructions that's going to result. So that would be very accurate. Yes, you could do that. Those drive tools are available. They were in heavy use by the cellular industry because they needed to do their network planning, and simply even driving around, and kind of seeing what tower you connect to. Those tools were available too. Would have been a reasonable proximity. Those tools, we're talking about a time when those types of network planning tools were readily available to law enforcement and researchers alike. So the answer is emphatically yes.
Is it true, or what is your opinion, Big Jeff, if Teresa Halbach was on the Avery salvage yard, not on County Q, but on the salvage yard, would have she still hit the Whitelaw cell tower?
I mean, I'd love to be able to do a physics-based analysis on that question. And it's at this point, given that the Whitelaw tower is no longer there, is it even possible? I mean, it's hard to say without a physics-based analysis. That's very difficult to do at this time. So in order for it to happen, there's just a lot of things that have to happen in reality that we could talk about. In 2G GSM, which was the nature of Teresa's phone, the phone actually had a lot more latitude about which tower we're connected to. And the phones back then were notorious for connecting to a tower and handing over, sort of moving over to towers that it felt had better coverage than the tower that it was on right now. So if I'm on a particular tower, my signal to noise ratio, as the communications people would say, starts to drop below a particular threshold, and I'm seeing a better signal to noise ratio from a different tower, and it's common for me to hop over to that other that other tower. And the phone had that kind of latitude in 2G GSM to do that. No such latitude 4G 5G signaling. In order for that to happen, the signal to noise ratio of that White Law Tower, which is a lot farther away than some of the other towers in the vicinity, would have had to have been better for that to happen. And given the notoriously bad coverage at the Avery salvage yard, which everybody claims about, even says that the coverage was bad, right? Over at Avery's, it's just hard. It's hard to, it's. I don't want to say it's inconclusive. It was provable. It might even still be possible to do some physics-based analysis. We know the tower locations from the from the AT&T document that was provided, and I think it was Seeking Truth for Good who actually got that. I would note, just a quick note, that document that describes the location of the cell towers doesn't have a document number. Is that surprising to you? It doesn't, so it didn't have a document number. I know it's shocking, but it's a surprise to me that she actually was able to get it, because it's obviously they tried to hide it. We know the tower locations, but the documentation that they gave us did not have the tower heights. It would be nice to know the tower heights. Right. And it'd be nice to know whether any tweaks were made to sort of the sector orientations, which is commonly done as you're establishing a cell phone network. One way to do it is sort of face true north, but it was very common that tweaks were made so you can make sure that the best part of the antennas are pointed in the the direction of the densest population. So those tweaks are made all the time, especially in GSM. So in order to do that physics-based analysis, we kind of need information that we don't have. One piece of information I will say, because we do provide information that is the most accurate information that we know. I have gone back to the Wayback Machine, as they call it, and looked at the GPS, looked at the overhead imagery for some of those locations, and the White Law Tower looks to me to be the tallest tower. Right. In the area. It's been replaced. I mean, it's not the World Trade Center tall. But height does not always make up for for proximity. There are others that were reasonably high that very well could have been much stronger. So I just don't know what to say about that White Law Tower. But given that it is something that could prove that she was not in Stephen Avery's driveway, that phone was somewhere else, and that somewhere else had to be, say, closer to Cuss Road, because that's what direction you have to go in to get towards that White Law Tower. That would say something, right?
Yep. No, that's fantastic. Thank you so much, Big Jeff.
Thanks for prodding me.
I don't really the whole phone tower I've never really incorporated in terms of my research, because I don't have much knowledge about cell phone towers and pinging and all that, and especially the fact that we have limited information. But I just want to put it out there just so we can get a little bit more of an understanding, because I think Big Jeff kind of just completely summed it up perfectly. And you're more basing it on the variables, there's certain variables that can alter the pinging locations and why a certain phone would go a little bit further, and that got to do with the height, if other towers are busy. So you kind of just sum that up. And I just want anyone to correct me if I'm wrong, but I've always been under the assumption throughout other people in the community who's done a lot of research on this, that the reason why you can't completely rule out the White Law Tower connection to Teresa Hallbuck is because we do have other people to bounce off. So we have allegedly Stephen Avery's phone records, and it shows that even when he's on the salvage yard and maybe down in the pit, that his phone goes either further beyond the White Law Tower and he can pick up towers further away. So it kind of just shows that there is that variableness of alternatives why that phone is bouncing, when we do have Stevens as an example, that even when he's on the Avery salvage yard, that he's not even pinging to the closer ones, but it's being diverted outwards?
I think that we know the cell phone provider of the Averys, and that information was given to us actually by Kayla Avery, who says the name of the cell phone company that all the Averys use, whose name is eluding me right this second because I worked about 12 hours today. And what you have to be very careful of when you talk about how far the cell phone signal is going to propagate is what generation of cellular technology was being used. Now, Teresa had a 2G GSM phone, second generation, but becoming very prolific at that time was was third generation cellular. So that was on the way in. So 3G cellular was in Wisconsin at the time. And for example, the burner phone, right? That we the famous Pam of God phone that we talk about, had the designation CDM, as part of the part number. That CDM stands really a shorthand for CDMA, which is a description of description of the waveform used by third generation cellular technology. And you're going to get a lot better range with third generation cellular technology than you're going to get with second generation cellular technology. So in some ways you could be comparing apples to oranges unless you really understand what generation Stephen Avery's phone was. But that being said, typically, you don't, the way that cellular works is you don't want to try and design a system where where the phone is constantly bouncing back and forth from one tower to another because of small changes in what I call signal to noise ratio. That's you want to have something in the system that an engineer would call hysteresis, and hysteresis just means that you have some stability as to where you are. You don't want things, jumping back and forth. That's all that means. It's odd to me, unless Stephen were sort of far away and then driving back to the Avery salvage yard, that his phone would actually be handed off from a close tower to a tower that's further away. That's a highly unusual situation in second and third generation cellular. Usually, it's just hard for me to believe that given the population density in that particular area, that you'd actually run into capacity problems on any tower, because you're just talking about voice in second and early third generation at the time of 2005. People didn't have smartphones. They weren't watching YouTube on their phone or downloading cat videos on their phone. Maybe they were texting a picture that they snapped, and that's about it. And the coverage, the capacity of its 2G and 3G networks was sufficient to handle the voice traffic, especially in rural Wisconsin. So any talk of being handed over to another tower because of busyness in this area seems to me a little bit strange. But it is. I can see it being possible that he could connect to a tower that's further away, especially if he was already connected to it, and maybe go to the gas station driving back to the Avery salvage yard. That it wasn't that he connected to it being far away; it's that he was connected to it and stayed connected to it, and the other towers didn't drop off. We'd have to know where those other towers were. We'd have to know the generation of cellular that we're talking about is probably a more critical variable than distance. That would help us understand how important the distance factor was.
If you're trying to craft a story, a narrative for a jury, for me, it's already really hard to understand. And even if they could kind of prove it, it's like you're in the weeds when you're trying to get this across to a jury. Do you think maybe they just thought, oh, this is going to be over their heads, no pun intended, or it's going to be too hard for the jury to come after, so let's spend our capital on something that might come through to the jury more clearly? I was wondering what you think about that.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's a difference, definitely, depending upon whether we're talking about the state or whether we're talking about the defense, right? The state spared no expense. They spent millions to try and get Stephen Avery convicted. If they thought that there was an angle that would get him convicted, I think they would have pursued it. I think it's an easy statement for the jury to understand that there's lots of places on the Avery salvage yard where you can connect to this White Law Tower, especially in the vicinity of Stephen's trailer. Right, that's an easy statement to understand. I think that's something they could possibly pursue. But I look, along those same lines, I look over to the Veely CD and I say, irrespective of, whether what we know now sort of proves the Veely CD or not, at the time they had the Veely CD that said all these porn searches were done, and they buried that. So yeah, they could have done it, but I think that would have been something that they would be more likely to bury than to present if the evidence if it sort of came back that it was unfavorable to their case. So I think things like that were very understandable, but if they didn't like the answer they got, somehow those things didn't see the light of day.
I just want to make a point to what Big Jeff kind of alluded to in terms of, whether it would have been more beneficial for the defense team to kind of explore this to show that she definitely left the, if they had done a little bit more, research or testing, like he said, how simple it could have been to get a phone out there and try to see what, towers can be picked up and such. But it goes back to the whole, famous quotation from the courtroom, and that is, lawyers don't ask questions they don't know the answers to. I think more so for the prosecution, they used it as a tool of a cluster of circumstances where they didn't want to have to explore it, because the last thing they would want to do is do those testing and it not come back favorable for them and have the whole there's no doubt she left and then have to try to fit that into the narrative. So if they could just present it in a sense of just a cluster of a circumstances, like, well, maybe, this kind of the ping, yeah, she might have left, but then also she could have, still been at the Avery salvage yard. There's no definitive answer. We can't rule one way or the other. But then you add that to the fact that you have a witness saying that the last time when they were leaving the property, she was still there. And then the last place that she was seen was the Avery salvage yard by Stephen Avery. For them, they'd done their job. They had created this, circumstance of the tower isn't as relevant as the fact that there's a witness and Stephen Avery himself who says, yes, she was here around that time. And the rest they can just kind of and then when you introduce the forensic evidence to that cluster, you then have an opportunity for the jury to not even have to worry about the whole cell tower. Did she leave? As for the defense side, they pose the same risk. As much as we all believe that she did leave the Avery salvage yard and Stephen did see her indeed turning left, it would have been also just a risk factor if they would have done those testing and it did come back inconclusive, because then they would have had to have given that as well to the prosecution side. And
is that true though? I hate to interrupt. I think that latter statement is true. I don't think the defense is obliged to disclose the results of any test that they do that's unfavorable in the United States anyway. I think the prosecution has to disclose everything, but I think the defense can hide anything they want.
Well, they would have to, Jeff, if you're going to put it in as evidence, because it's discovery. You have to give them over everything you're going to put into court. So it would go into the discovery phase and they would be very well aware of what was coming in. So maybe not give it straight over, but they would be well aware of it, because they would then plan. The prosecution would then have an opportunity to get their experts in to also review that, those testing, and then dispute it or find an avenue around it. So they would indeed have it in a courtroom. So they would have, yeah.
I misinterpreted what you. So if the defense does a test and the defense's test come back, and I don't think they had the brains to do this test for the cellular brains anyways. Mm-hmm. If that test had come back and said, this is the defense doing this test, that you indeed could easily touch the White Law Tower, I don't believe they would have put it in as evidence, and I don't believe that they would be required to disclose that, just to clarify what
they wouldn't have to unless it was favorable for them. And then that if they wanted to use that as a favorable thing, that they had done this testing, an expert had come in, they had done a review, and they were submitting it as evidence, then the prosecution would get it, because then that way they could come in. But again, it's still a risk factor for them, because you know, if the prosecution gets wind of it, you know, they could then go, well, they've kind of.
Great point. Yeah, great point. We heard they're doing it, so we got to do something. So they might come with us. We don't know it necessarily whether they are or aren't until later, but we better get on our. Yeah. Excellent point. Thank you for that clarification.
So she's clearly on her way home when she hits that call forward button at 2:41. I believe the cell phones place her in the vicinity of Cuss Road. Cuss Road leads into the quarry. Could she have had something set up at the quarry to do a shot? Or if someone saw her, they could have just flagged her down to do a hustle shot.
Like we've talked about, I think the most believable part of that statement is I don't believe it's the cell phone ping would be sufficiently accurate to put her in the vicinity of Cuss Road, but certainly puts her in the vicinity south of the Avery salvage yard, because that tower is south and a little bit west of Avery's. So the fact that she's probably making it simple for the for the viewer, but that's the type of accuracy that you're not going to get out of a cell phone ping in the vicinity of Cuss Road. So she's got to put a few factors together, including the time when Stephen says she left, the likely route she took, and the time of that ping. So it's not the ping that puts her there; it's the other information that she's using to sort of compile that narrative. The cell phone tower ping alone is certainly not accurate enough to put her there. But south of Avery's, yes.
Knocked on the ground and then hit on the head and then ultimately shot. Yes. It could have happened that way. It happened very quickly. I'm sure disposing of the body took much longer than the actual murder.
It's exactly opposite of Ken Kratz's story of this long drawn out torture scene that took forever. I think in that aspect, she's got it right. It happened quickly, and the cleanup and the burning and the cover up of the crime took extremely longer. I do like her point there.
That's a great point. It takes a long time to reduce a body to ashes. It's just that simple. And the grotesqueness of the mutilation that had to happen. We haven't found any spot on Earth that looks like that activity could have happened, right? And there's going to be a lot of blood, a lot of gore, a lot of mess. Where is it?
On the south side of Cuss Road, before you get on Redaunt's property, is a wooded area. Remember, that's where the scent dogs ran over to the suspected burial site. Law enforcement determines that it's not a burial site. But what they fail to think about is, because the scent dogs ran over and a cadaver dog alerted on that spot, isn't it possible that Teresa's car with her body was parked in there for a few hours before she's burned? Or is she laid out on
the scent dog that hit or was going towards this area here was Loof, and her dog handler was Sarah Forsky or Sarah Fausk, and the cadaver dog was Brutus, and her handler was Julie Kramer. So it's very, very interesting that when Loof went up to the crime scene tape, Loof was prevented from crossing the crime scene tape. The law enforcement officers that were down there at Cuss Road phoned up Jerry Pagel, and he said, do not allow the dog to cross. So Loof actually did not cross into where the clandestine burial site was. Later on, the cadaver dog, Brutus, actually hit upon the shovel that was used to allegedly dig up the clandestine burial site. So what is important here is that you have two totally different type of dogs hitting or giving an alert at the same area. Loof was specifically centered for Teresa Hallbach, whereas Brutus is a cadaver dog. It detects human decomposition, right? So it's not specific for Teresa Hallbach. So think about this, guys. What is the chance that both a cadaver dog and a scent dog give an alert in the same area as the so-called clandestine burial site?
I certainly have to agree that I would count that as what we would call in my business a low probability event, that both kind of dogs hit in this one spot and she wasn't there. That would be a tremendously low probability event.
Out on the soil and maybe just barely covered up. It's not a place anyone would have been looking. No one even knows she's gone. The Cuss Road entrance is isolated. It's the entrance into the Redont side of the quarry, but you can access the Manitowoc side from there. It's a very desolate place. It is the place where you would kill someone.
We'll follow this until we get to you.
Where's this called? That goes into the quarry.
Straight east.
Did you get an impression how far off the road it was? Because the dogs just come like a beeline. Do you think
Yeah.
it was out in here?
I know that this area was taped off.
Yeah. So maybe.
It's very interesting that Loof, who is the scent dog, went all the way from Stephen Avery's trailer across the cornfield straight to the end of where Cuss Road was. And her nose led towards where the clandestine burial site was. And it's very interesting that the investigators prevented Loof from crossing the crime scene tape, even though Loof was a long distance away.
I also like to add that I believe it was Bushman. This goes back to the 1985 crew. That Bushman was called at like 3 a.m. in the morning to come out and handle with really selective when you pick this specific officer that has a history involved in 1985 stuff, was around, and he was a reserve officer at the time, if I remember correctly. But they call him first at 3 a.m. to get him out of bed, get on down here.
They
But
called
nothing
him
to-
out of
but nothing-
retirement, right? He's retired, and he
Right.
allegedly had experience with the dogs, and he was one of the arresting officers of Stephen Avery in 1985.
Mike Bushman was a canine handler. It's very, very interesting. No one actually reported seeing Bushman with a dog, but it seems to make sense, right? If two dogs, Loof and Brutus, are able to hit upon Cuss Road at the clandestine burial site or very close to the clandestine burial site, how on earth can you explain how Mike Bushman, he was part of Search Team A? There was a group of them. A lot of them were MTSO officers. How do you explain how Mike Bushman is randomly walking around the woods at Cuss Road, which is nowhere near Stephen Avery's property, all of a sudden finds a clandestine burial site, which he believes is a clandestine burial site? And as Big Jeff alluded to, Mike Bushman has got a long, long history with Stephen Avery. Mike Bushman was one of the arresting officers of Stephen Avery on the night that he was arrested. So he went down there and arrested Stephen Avery back in 1985. Mike Bushman is also a loyal servant of guess who? Tom Kacerik. It's very interesting that of all the hundreds of officers that they had at their disposal, the investigators ring up Mike Bushman. And we're actually covering this and reading with the crew. If anyone wants to get more information, let me tell you, come and check out our podcast. You'll be shocked at what was found at Cuss Road. It's a never-ending story, but it's rather remarkable that the investigators themselves called in the canines, and yet the investigators prevented the canines from getting any closer towards the so-called clandestine burial site. And just as a record, Mike Bushman clocked in at 7:38 in the morning, which is very, very interesting. He was one of the first officers to clock in so early in the morning. It begs the question: what time did he find the clandestine burial site, and did he, in actual fact, have a dog with him? Very interesting to find out.
I didn't think it was actually Bushman that found it. I thought it was just a searcher and part of his team A that found it and then alerted him that there was a site and then called him over. It wasn't him personally that stumbled across it.
The actual literature is very, very mixed, right? They talk about a searcher of finding the clandestine burial site. Well, he actually was part of the search team, and remember, he's no longer an official MTSO officer. He was sort of semi-retired, and I have read somewhere that it was him that found the clandestine burial site. He was part of Search Team A, and the reason, what is interesting, Kelly, is that they're referred to as volunteer searchers. Well, he was off the books. He wasn't an official MTSO employee, so he would have been regarded as a casual searcher. Now, I have read somewhere, I'll see if I can find it, where it was actually him that found the clandestine burial site and not a random member of the public, because remember, all the areas were gridded and searched systematically. My understanding is it was actually Bushman who found the clandestine burial site.
I just want to pose a question to the panel and obviously the chat. I don't think anyone here questions that Cuss could be significant versus plays no significant at all. I think we're all curious about it, but there's nothing that's ever really come out definitive that this was a hosting for a partial body site, a burial. I agree that the timing of finding Cuss and then obviously things start to appear afterward is very interesting in terms of the timeline. And I think that sparks a lot of people's curiosity and why a lot of people lean towards Cuss Road being very significant. But my question is, for us that believe that the state would be, trying to, if they had focused in on Stephen Avery, they had a direct narrative, they had a direct tunnel vision, why would they risk exposing Cuss Road to all these people as much as they did? And although they made it go away by saying it is a peat moss bag that they discovered, but why would that be part of a plan to bring it in the first place? Why would you just not make Cuss Road disappear? Take it off the book. Why would you want searchers out anywhere near an area that isn't on the Avery salvage yard that would ruin any focus on that tunnel vision you had? So my question is, do you think that Cuss Road was so at the beginning that they didn't even see it coming? Or do you see what I'm trying to say in terms of the risk factor of it being ever exposed or found was just a little bit too high for them? So why would they bring Bushman in to discover something that goes against potentially Stephen Avery? Because it's not on the Avery salvage yard. He, at this stage, has no connection to it. So what are your thoughts, everybody?
Oh, well, for myself, the big question is this. One of our researchers in the foul play team asked this incredible question, which had me floored. And that goes with what you were saying, Kelly. If they found something at Cuss Road, why didn't they try and tie Stephen to it? They could have easily made some type of story or narrative that tied Stephen Avery to Cuss Road. So the question is, what did Bushman actually find that pointed away from Stephen Avery? So if they found something at Cuss Road, why did they abandon Cuss Road? And I just found the document in CASO. It's on page 137, and it was written by a report by John Diedring. And if I could just read the statement out very, very quickly. This is Diedring. I quote, "I arrived at the east end of Cuss Road at approximately 10:45 hours and spoke with former Deputy Inspector Bushman. He indicated he had found a possible excavation site and did take us to the site." So there's no doubt about it. It was Bushman that found the clandestine burial site. So the question is, why did they abandon Cuss Road? Why, if they found something there of significance, why didn't they try and tie it with Stephen? Because remember, November the 7th, they had no idea what happened to Teresa Horbach, where she was murdered. So in my opinion, they found something at Cuss Road that did not directly point towards Stephen Avery, and they abandoned it. And maybe it was simpler, Kelly, to bring everything back to Stephen Avery's trailer and burn pit to nail him, set him up, rather than try and come up with a scenario whereby somehow he had murdered Teresa Horbach at Cuss Road, then somehow took her body and her RAV back to his trailer, dismembered her, cremated her, and got rid of her RAV. I think that's a much harder plan to work on than what the state went with. And remember, the state went with the very simple hypothesis that neither Teresa nor her RAV4 ever left the property. Maybe it was too hard to work, Kelly.
That's a really good point, though, you just said, because they settled with the fact that she never left the property. But what I'm saying is, you know, this happened so early in the investigation. They could have built a narrative of that. In fact, the state actually said that in the reply to Kathleen Zellner. They said, you know, I think they were touching base more on the fact that Teresa, about the RAV being pushed back on, and Tom Skowinski being an eyewitness to that. And they kind of said, well, you know, if we would have known that ourselves, we didn't know about this, blah, blah, blah. It could have helped the state fill in the gaps, because the state can only give so much. So what I'm trying to say in terms of that is, you make a great point, but you got to remember Cuss Road was so early, so they could have, and the supporter in foul play, whoever made that question, was hit a really good point. If this happened so early on, they could have built a narrative around it. Cuss Road does not rule out Stephen Avery in a sense for the courts, because he still has access to it. It's at the back. It's at the backyard to the side of him. He has accessibility like everyone on the Avery salvage yard and everyone that works at the deer camp. So my point again is, you know, if it was found so early before anything else was found, why not just start a narrative based off a truth? And it would, for me, it would probably flow a lot easier than have this, you know, idea that, you know, she never left, everything was done there, yet there's absolutely no forensic evidence to support that there was a crime that happened at the Avery salvage yard. So I get really, again, like I said, this is an opinion based. I just get really confused with myself is, what do I actually believe happened at Cuss, or what was discovered? Because although you said Loof, the scent dog, came in and wasn't allowed to pass the tape, absolutely correct. He wasn't. No one was allowed past that tape. And in earlier podcasts, we've discussed about the forensic pathway that they set up, where they don't allow people to enter, even canines, because, you know, the risk factor of contamination raises. But then, you know, he went down at, I think Luth came down at like 1:30 or something like that, and then he was brought back at 3:30, and he was taken to that burial mound. Like he was actually he was put on that point and ignored it. He didn't even hit on it, but he hit on the shovel, like you said. But that shovel, compared to the soil, unless they removed every part of soil, why would he not just hit on the ground? Because there would have been still decomposition and elements that could have soaked in that they wouldn't have been able to hide and remove, yet he did not hit on it once he got to it, an hour and 2 hours later. So it's just a few things like that just tripped me out. So that's why I posed the question to you, gentlemen, and obviously the chat.
Yeah, Kelly, it's a good question, and to me, I agree that it is very hard to definitively know what happened at Cuss Road or whether indeed that was. I mean, I take strongly Dr. Silkman's point regarding what I'd referred to as a low probability event a second ago. But for me, I remain on team reasonable doubt, and just the shenanigans at Cuss Road, just in my mind, just serve to add more reasonable doubt. Particularly the shovel, right? They Loof hits on actually was it Brutus or Loof that hit on the shovel? I think it was Brutus, right? The cadaver dog.
Which is a cadaver dog.
Yeah, he hits on the shovel. And then they want to be double dog sure, right? To put a poor pun in there. So they show that same shovel without switching it. I just asked Coburn to other cadaver dogs, and they say no. that to me is we showed we can dismiss this now because other cadaver dogs said no. They don't get things wrong like that. They're highly trained, and they're not allowed to even enter into the service of the the cadaver dog unless they have phenomenally accurate hits on these things. So to me, it's much more likely in that situation that they sort of switched out the shovel and let the dogs sniff a different shovel, because there were certainly plenty of them around if they're trying to excavate this clandestine site, whether there was something there or not. So to me, it's more reasonable doubt. I don't know what was there or what wasn't there. I think I think there's been work done regarding people who signed in and signed out there or not, and who showed up with the ambulance and then who didn't sign out but was gone when the ambulance left. I mean, there's just there is a lot of suspicious stuff going on there. Why not link it to Stephen? I don't know what they were thinking, but certainly every single officer at that site, I highly doubt was in on conspiracy. Conspiracies do have to be small. A few Kasuric loyalists, I think, would be sufficient. I'm not sure what they felt they could get away with, when they were there. I mean, it would require a lot of, in my mind, real construction. Who was kept outside the crime scene tape and who was allowed in, and I'd want to know all those things before I'd say anything definitive, other than there's something that really stinks about Cuss Road. And that's all I can say.
Well, I think that one thing that's also shocking and true is that we could probably do a limited series, 10 or 20 episodes on Cuss Road alone. Sometimes I feel that it's so involved and there are so many different angles to it. But that's all we can hit on for today. So that means we throw it back over to Big Jeff for his on the road wrap-up comment.
Yeah, well, thanks, Jeff. It was good to get to talk about the cell phones today. I hope that what we did answered a lot of questions that people might have. I get the feeling, though, that the real remedy to the open number of cell phone questions that people have is going to require us to do a live at some point, where people can just ask the questions that they have. So I think we should do that. I look forward to doing that.
People. Don't tease them. They're going to be angry if you don't deliver. Big Jeff.
I'll deliver. I promise to deliver. I did this work thing that I just got done with was a sort of a major thing that was taking up a lot of my time, and I'll have more time to be able to do something like that in the future. With regard to this episode, it was good to help clarify some of the questions that people had. I like to see Kathleen Zellner at her finest, just sort of digging in with as deep as she can, with both hands as deep as she can. She's interested in the truth. You can't watch this and say that Kathleen is not interested in the truth. And if she found any scent of evidence that Stephen was guilty, she'd stop spending her own money trying to prove him innocent, and she spent a ton of it. So with that said, I'll hand it off to the next.
Well, thank you very much, Big Jeff, for those comments. And Dr. Silkman, if you wouldn't give us your summation for today.
Look, really, what an excellent podcast that was. And we're very fortunate to have the expertise of Big Jeff, who sounded like he was on a burner phone. Sorry, Big Jeff. But we're very fortunate to have his expertise on cell phones and cell towers. I really enjoyed the episode. Cuss Road is a very intriguing area for me for research. Like I said, we're doing this as part of the Reading with the Crew series. And I've gone into a lot of depth following what the cadaver dogs and also the scent dogs found. And I'm sure in future episodes, we'll be doing more on Cuss Road. Very, very interesting area. Thank you so much, guys. And thank you to everyone in chat.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Dr. Silkman. And Kel, if you wouldn't do us the honor of leading us out of episode 32.
Certainly, it's been a pleasure. It's a very interesting conversation always when we go back to Cuss Road and exploring the timeline, because like I said at the beginning, Cuss Road fits in at the beginning, and then seeing what followed has always sparked a lot of people's interest. So thank you, and see you guys next episode.
Yeah, all right. Well, thank you, Kel, for those wrap-up comments, and thank you guys for everything that you did today and your contributions. Thanks to everybody out in chat who has been coming on this journey along with us. So if you haven't before, please like, subscribe, hit the little ding bell button, and also share in your social media. It's the most effective way to help the channel grow. So with that said, for Big Jeff, Dr. Silkman, and Kel, this is Jeff Jones saying this has been Discussing a Murderer.